You're welcome back. Well, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, uh, recently issued the new tax appeal tribunal rules for 2021. The rules were issued under paragraph 21 of the fifth schedule to the Federal Inland Revenue Service Act 2007. The rules replaced the 2010 rules and are intended to guide the practice and procedure of tax appeal tribunal proceedings. Sounds very technical. Well, thank God we do have with us here the immediate past Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and now the Chief Executive Officer of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf, to break it down for us. Who better than you to do it? Good morning, Dr.
Thank
Yusuf.
you, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So, first of all, help us to understand this rule, who it concerns, and how it affects you and I.
Yeah, the rule is about the procedure of the tax appeal tribunal. And of course, there are some parts of the rule or components of the rule that one should commend. First, there is a provision about electronic filing.
Yeah.
So at least in these days of technology, I mean, that's a welcome development. You don't have to go and file physically. There's also the provision about virtual appearance. In other words, if you want to appear before the tribunal, the new rule says that you can appear virtually. Again, that's about applying technology to the proceedings of the tribunal. There's also the component that has to do with the place of hearing. You know, we have different zones, about 8 zones of those tribunals. And for convenience, you can file for hearing or for your complaints, whatever it is, in any zone, depending on what is convenient for you. So these provisions, I think, is something that we should comment.
So sorry, is that depending on what's convenient for you, depending on where you are operating from? Is that a factor to be considered?
Where you are operating from and where it is also convenient, because again, it's a function of your main operational base, your headquarters, and all of those things, and where the key actors also stay. So I think that, again, is something that one has to commend. The one that is a bit contentious and which is a bit disturbing is one that says that if you are making a complaint around the issue of tax assessment, you have to deposit 50% of the amount in dispute. In other words, if you have an assessment that you are contesting, no matter how much the assessment is, you have to deposit 50% of that. I think that, for me, is something that needs to be reviewed. Because the whole principle of tribunal and of this arbitration or dispute management system is to also ensure the principle of fair hearing. Because you cannot have a situation where, supposing you have a very outrageous assessment, to the extent that even the 50% may become even difficult for you to pay. Does that mean you'll not be entitled to an appeal?
I mean, you'll be forced to just bear.
Yeah, that is if you can afford it. It can be outrageous sometimes. You know, so the point is that that provision, I think, is something that we need to look at in the interest of fair hearing. Because we are talking about creating a tax environment that will promote investment. Because in economics, there's something we call a general equilibrium theory. And what that theory says is that if you have a policy and you want to achieve an objective, in this case, the whole essence of this tax administration is about revenue. But we need to look beyond revenue and look at how some of these things affect other parts or other aspects of our economic life and other aspects of national life. So that is very important, and that is the whole principle about a general equilibrium mindset. There is this, urge, this bullishness about raising revenue. And you can push this thing to a point that you begin to do so at the detriment of investment.
And then the whole country will lose.
The whole country will lose. Because, okay, you generate the revenue, but what is happening to investment? What is happening to job creation? What is happening to prices? What is happening to the welfare of the people? Because some of this drive for revenue, sometimes it is the common man that bears the brunt. Because some of these things have a way of affecting the end users. So the point I'm making is that the tax appeal tribunal, the procedures, the new rule that was, announced by the finance minister, which was effective from the 1st of June, is something that we need to review in the interest of fair hearing. And it could also create challenges for the process. The process could also be compromised. If you have a situation where you know that no matter the amount of assessment, before anybody can listen to you, you have to first deposit 50%. It puts you under a lot of pressure, and it could compromise the integrity of the whole process. So the appeal here, and it's a very strong appeal, in the interest of promoting investment, in the interest of ensuring fairness and equity, in the interest of also creating jobs, which the president has been emphasizing, we need to create a tax environment that is investment friendly.
But are there steps or are there any efforts, to get this appeal to the minister, or at least start the process of getting, this sorted out?
It's an advocacy process. Various organizations have raised concerns about it. Some experts in the tax environment have raised concerns about this. But, advocacy is work in progress. For as long as you have these challenges, we should continue to advocate. It's not even so much about the legality, because there's also the legal angle. When you look at the procedures and you look at the Federal Inland Revenue Establishment Act of 2007, there's also some inconsistency. But that is not even the issue. The issue is to get the authorities to see reason, to appreciate the challenges that this provision creates for investors.
What would be the ideal from your perspective when we're talking about this 50%?
No, well, the ideal, because if you look at the FIRS Establishment Act, there's already a provision there of 2007 that it is the tribunal that will use its discretion on what amount of deposit you pay. And that will even arise only if you have not been filing returns. That is what is in the Act. But this one is completely different. So that is a bit fair. And even if you have to make a deposit according to that Act, you pay the actual amount that you paid the previous year. Then your appeal can be heard. But when you have a situation where you pay 50% of the amount in disputes, I don't think it's fair. So it's an issue of fairness. It's an issue of getting, the investors to have some more confidence. Because if you have a tax environment that could be frightening or that could scare investors, then you have a problem. Just as I said, tax administration or tax is not just only about revenue. We need to look at the wider implications. Because I've been seeing even in the National Assembly, practically all the agencies of government are now being pushed to go and raise revenue. Even those that are not revenue-generating agencies. And I know what investors are facing already, especially with agencies that they interface with. The regulatory agencies, for instance. There are all sorts of fees, levies, renewal fees.
Do we still have the issue of multiple taxation? Because the government has come up, a couple of times to say the system has been aligned.
No. Those problems are still there. You may not call them tax. If you have a regulation, there are some sectors where you could have up to 5, 6, or 7 regulators. And for each of them, for all your interaction with them, you have to make some payments. And there is no framework to regulate some of these fees. And when you engage them, they will tell you, well, they are not being properly funded. They have to generate IGR. So you have a situation where the investors, apart from paying the mainstream tax, which is the corporate tax, the VAT, and the rest of them, you also, in a way, also have the responsibility of financing the agencies of government. Because they will tell you that they have to generate revenue for them to be able to run their operations. And now that the government is even getting more bullish in terms of revenue drive, the situation may even get worse. So the point I'm making is that if we create an environment, a tax environment that is more investment friendly, that is not too harsh, that is not draconian, invariably we will see a positive impact on investment.
And I guess it's
we will
also
see a positive impact on GDP.
Yeah.
And if the economy is growing, tax revenue will grow.
I guess it's also important to also note here that payment of tax is a necessity and it's a responsibility that I don't think the private sector want to run away from.
Certainly not. Certainly not. Certainly not. I'm not here to canvass that people should not pay tax. It's a statutory responsibility. And for anybody to be a responsible corporate citizen, you have to pay your tax. But the point I'm making is that we have to make it easy. There has to be fairness. I mean, there are some what you call the principles of taxation. There's the principle of fairness of tax. There's the principle of convenience. There's the principle of efficiency. There's also the benefits principle of taxation. So there are so many things. These are principles that guides very good tax administration. So as much as possible, we should align our tax management, tax administration system to these key principles.
And they should
in the interest of the economy.
They should even also promote the ease of doing business policy.
Yes. It's an investment climate issue. Because we have been clamoring for investment. Domestic investors, we want foreign investors, all of them. We want to create an environment for them to come. If you see countries that are attracting a lot of investment, they are doing a lot in the area of the taxes. I'm not saying that people are not paying taxes there. But the tax is such a way that it encourages people to come and invest. And just as I said, we should not only be focusing on revenue. If you focus on revenue, you may have a situation where you do so at the detriment of investment, at the detriment of the capacity to create jobs. So the way to measure the efficiency of some of these things is not to be looking narrowly as to how much has been generated. We should be looking at how has this also affected investment? How has it affected job creation? What are the investors saying about this? What kind of feedback do you have? I mean, take, for instance, the customs. The customs has a dual responsibility or dual role of revenue generation, of trade facilitation. I can tell you almost 100% focus of the customs is on revenue generation. And if you see what some investors go through, just going through the ports, not only the customs, all the agencies, it is a nightmare. And how will an investor at the end of the day be able to even generate the revenue for you? If from day one, even before making money, there's a lot of pressure already.
But are there conversations?
We are talking of raw materials, we are talking of equipment, we are talking of so many things.
Are there conversations between the private and the public sector, maybe the Ministry of Trade, to try to balance out things like this?
There are conversations. I mean, this has been ongoing. It's one thing to have an engagement. It's another thing to have an outcome in terms of results or impact. But those engagements have to be sustained by all the key players in the private sector. So those things are necessary so that we have a conducive investment environment. Because that is what we desire, generally. That is what the president desires. Because we need an environment that can generate a lot more employment. The president has been talking about taking 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years. How will you do that? It is not by the handout of the social investment program. It is about what investors are able to do, especially the SMEs, because they are more in number. They have the spread, So if we do that, and I'm saying that this tax issue is also a very important, and this is not just only about federal. I must emphasize that.
Yeah, because we have local government,
we have
guys who come to claim their...
Yes, all sorts of characters who just knock at your door and be asking for all manner of things. And if you don't comply very quickly, they have all sorts of people, before you know, they will seal up your premises and embarrass you. The same thing at the state level. So this principle must apply to all levels of government. The principle of fairness and the consciousness that we need to grow this economy, we need to support investments. We should not sacrifice investment on the altar of revenue generation.
All right, thank
That
you.
is important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, for helping us unbundle the seemingly technical appeal tribunal procedure and, of course, how it affects everyone. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. Of course, Dr. Muda Yusuf is the immediate past Director General of LCCI and now the Chief Executive Officer of Center for the Promotion of Private